Genevieve Miller was only 28 years old when her neighbors decided the trench she was digging around her cabin proved she'd lost her mind to grief. It was September 1891 in the Idaho Territory, near the mining town of Ironwood, and the mining community had seen plenty of widow desperation. But nobody had ever dug a 4-foot-deep ditch completely encircling their home and filled it with sawdust. Genevieve's husband, Robert Miller, had died in a mining collapse in May 1891. Robert, 32, worked the silver mines outside Ironwood and had been married to Genevieve for 6 years. The marriage had been practical. Robert needed someone to manage the household, and Genevieve needed security. The cabin was Robert's built in 1889 on his mining claim. When he died, the mining company offered Genevieve a $50 settlement and 30 days to vacate. Genevieve had other plans. Idaho Territory law allowed a widow to inherit her husband's claim if she could prove it up by working it. She couldn't work a mine, but she could live on the claim and lease the mineral rights. She filed the paperwork, leased the rights to Robert's former mining partners for $30 yearly, and kept the cabin. The cabin was 320 square feet frame construction shake roof. Board floor elevated 18 inches above ground on stone piers. It had one catastrophic flaw, Genevieve observed. During her 6 years living there, the floor froze solid every winter. Idaho winters were brutal temperatures, frequently dropping to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about minus 40 degrees Celsius for weeks. The ground would freeze to depths of 4 to 6 feet. Critically, the moisture in the soil would freeze and expand, creating frost heave that could crack walls and lift foundations. But the more immediate problem was the frozen floor. The 18-inch air gap provided minimal protection. Cold air flowed under the cabin, the ground froze solid, and the floorboards conducted that cold upward. By January, the floor might be only 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 9 to minus 6 Celsius, literally frozen despite the fireplace burning. Every cabin in the area faced this misery. But Genevieve possessed knowledge most frontier women didn't. Her father, Thomas Wright, had been a civil engineer working on railroad construction through the Rockies, teaching Genevieve about drainage, frost penetration, thermal barriers, and foundation engineering. Genevieve understood that frozen floors were not inevitable. It was a failure of foundation insulation and moisture management. The problem was straightforward physics. As winter cold penetrated, downward moisture in the soil turned to ice, which conducts cold extremely efficiently. The frozen ground acted as an enormous cold mass, radiating intense cold upward. Genevieve realized the solution was to prevent the soil beneath the cabin from freezing in the first place. If the soil stayed above freezing, the floor couldn't freeze, regardless of the outside air temperature. Her design was radical. Dig a perimeter trench completely around the cabin 4 feet deep, 2 feet wide. Fill the trench with sawdust, an excellent free insulating material from local sawmills. The sawdust-filled trench would create a thermal barrier, preventing frost from penetrating laterally into the soil beneath the living space. Additionally, it would provide drainage, removing moisture that would otherwise freeze. To her neighbors, it looked like a grieving widow had gone insane and was digging her own grave around her house. The battle with earth and mockery excavation began in early September 1891, and Genevieve quickly discovered that digging 58 cubic yards of earth alone was brutal. The perimeter was 72 feet total. At 4 feet deep and 2 feet wide, the trench required moving approximately 58 tons of earth using only hand tools. The work rhythm became brutal. She woke at dawn and began digging by 6 a.m. Each cubic yard of compacted Montana soil full of clay, gravel, and rocks weighed about 1 ton. She had to swing the pickaxe to break up the hard earth first, then shovel the 40-pound bucket loads out and carry them up and over the 4-foot-deep trench wall hour after hour. By the end of each day, she had moved perhaps 1 cubic yard, approximately 2,000 pounds of earth. She would climb out barely able to stand, exhausted and losing significant weight. The rock obstacles were a nightmare, requiring an hour of prying just to leverage out one large stone. Water infiltration added difficulty turning soil into heavy mud. 6 weeks of dawn to dusk labor completed the excavation by mid-October, a continuous ditch encircling the cabin. The community reaction began within days. Thomas Shaw, a neighboring miner, was first to comment when he stopped by on September 10th and found her 3 feet deep in the ditch. "Mrs. Miller," Thomas called down. "What are you doing?" Genevieve explained the physics. "I'm digging a thermal barrier trench. It'll prevent frost penetration under the cabin and keep my floor from freezing this winter." "A thermal? You're digging a ditch around your house that's going to undermine your foundation." "Moats don't stop cold." Genevieve explained how the sawdust insulation would prevent the lateral spread of the frost wedge. "The soil beneath will stay warmer. Warmer soil means a warmer floor." Thomas shook his head. That's not how cold works, Genevieve. Cold is just cold. You can't stop it with sawdust in a ditch. I think grief has affected your thinking." By late September, word had spread. Sarah Shaw Thomas's wife organized a visit from the Community Service League. 5 women arrived on October 1st. They found Genevieve 2/3 done with the trench. "Genevieve," Sarah said gently, "we've come to help. This trench is dangerous and pointless. Let us help you fill it back in." "The trench is necessary," Genevieve said, leaning on her shovel. "It's a thermal barrier system. My father was a civil engineer. He taught me about frost penetration. This will work." The women exchanged concerned glances. Invoking her deceased father was additional evidence of delusion. Genevieve politely refused all offers and continued working after they left. By mid-October, the excavation was complete. Next came the sawdust acquisition. Genevieve acquired dozens of loads for free from the Ironwood lumber mill if she hauled it herself. By early November, the trench was filled, creating an invisible moat of insulating material. The test and absolute proof. November brought the first hard freezes, the annual transition into the Idaho winter everyone dreaded. This was the test period. Inside, Genevieve monitored her floor temperature daily. In early November, with outside temperatures around 25 degrees Fahrenheit, the space beneath her floor was a bearable 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The difference was psychologically enormous. 40 degrees meant the soil beneath was staying well above freezing. By mid-November, with outside temperatures around 10 degrees Fahrenheit regularly, she could walk across the floor in light indoor shoes, not boots, feeling only cold wood, not the painful ice cold of previous Novembers. The most objective proof was water-spilled water would puddle and stay liquid for hours, instead of freezing within minutes. December brought sustained cold to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The exposed ground outside froze to a depth of 3 feet. Genevieve's floor stayed above freezing. She could now sit on the floor to mend clothes, something impossible before, when floor contact meant pain within minutes. The neighboring cabins experienced December exactly as they always had. The Shaw cabin floor froze solid. The Harrison cabin floor developed frost crystals, making it slippery. Everyone bundled in heavy boots indoors. Then January 1892 brought the catastrophic cold that proved everything beyond doubt. The temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit and stayed there for days. The frost penetration advanced steadily, reaching 5 feet deep in unprotected soil. The ground became a solid frozen mass, radiating intense cold. The Shaw cabin experienced catastrophic floor failure by January 13th. The frozen ground beneath, now at 5 feet depth and minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, radiated intense cold upward through the inadequate 18-inch air gap. The floorboards conducted that cold. By January 13th afternoon, the Shaw cabin floor reached 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah Shaw could not walk barefoot on their floor for even 1 second without severe pain. Any moisture touching the floor froze immediately, ice crystals forming within 30 seconds. The Harrison family's floor was even worse, dropping to 0 degrees Fahrenheit by January 14th. Frost formed heavily on the wood surface, coating it like a thick, dangerous skating rink. Genevieve's cabin floor, protected by the sawdust thermal barrier, preventing lateral frost penetration, maintained 45 degrees Fahrenheit through the entire cold snap, despite exterior temperatures reaching minus 30. The physics were undeniable. The frozen ground hit the sawdust barrier and could not penetrate rapidly. The protected soil beneath the cabin stayed above freezing. The difference between 45 degrees Fahrenheit and 5 degrees Fahrenheit was civilization versus survival horror. Genevieve could walk barefoot across her floor for 30 seconds, uncomfortable but tolerable, not a dangerous weapon like her neighbors' floors. On January 15th, after another night at minus 30 degrees, Sarah Shaw made a desperate walk to Genevieve's cabin. Entering Genevieve's home, she immediately felt the difference. Sarah touched Genevieve's floor. "Your floor isn't frozen. It's cold." "But it's not frozen. How is this possible?" Genevieve explained what she tried to explain in September: the thermal barrier trench, preventing frost from penetrating laterally. "The ditch we all mocked," Sarah whispered. "It actually works." Word spread by January 16th. The Miller widow, whose trench everyone ridiculed, had the only unfrozen floor in the area during the worst cold in years. By spring 1892, 4 families had begun excavating their own perimeter trenches. The Shaw family dug theirs in April. The concept spread as a practical solution to a problem everyone had accepted as unsolvable. Genevieve became a consultant, paid in labor and goods. The widow everyone had pitied became a valued community resource. The thermal barrier trench became standard Idaho Territory Foundation practice by the early 1890s. Genevieve lived in her cabin until 1900, when she sold the mining claim for $800 and moved to Ironwood proper. She remarried a widowed shopkeeper who appreciated intelligent women, and they built a house incorporating the thermal barrier principle. She died in 1932 at age 74. Her obituary focused primarily on the thermal barrier trench, the ditch everyone laughed at that solved frozen floors through simple engineering. The original cabin stood until 1948. The thermal barrier trench was still intact. Modern foundation engineering in cold climates uses similar concepts: perimeter insulation preventing frost penetration, though with modern materials instead of sawdust. The story is about a widow who understood that problems everyone accepts aren't always inevitable. Unfrozen floors in an Idaho winter aren't a miracle. They're just physics applied correctly.